We're definitely late to the party with these, but we recently brought them in, and they're so unique that we have to review the Gearbox Pro Power paddles. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets and Runners. So today we're reviewing the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated and Fusion, but we're not going to talk about the controls. I haven't actually played with those yet, and I have so much to say about these that I'd have to make two separate videos anyway for the sake of your time. Now of course, before we start the review, let me remind you that if you do want to check out the Gearbox Pro Power paddles, you can visit us on our website, racketsandrunners.ca. And please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So let's talk about some specs, and we're going to start with the Fusion because it's so much more unique. The Pro Power Fusion weighs 8 ounces, it's only 16 inches long with a 5.5 inch handle and a 14mm core. Now you look at this thing and you think to yourself, wow, that looks a lot like an elongated paddle, and that's because yes, Gearbox decided to give us something that's basically just a smaller version of an elongated paddle. Usually paddles this short are also a little bit wider to make up for the loss in real estate lengthwise. I've been wanting someone to make something like this for a very long time. I'll explain why as we get more into the review, but I really like this shape. Now, ironically, the elongated paddle is much more standard just because there's a lot more like it. It's 16.5 inches long, also weighs 8 ounces with a 14mm core and 5.5 inch handle. It's basically just a magnified version of the Fusion, which means these two paddles have very similar swing patterns, which is part of the reason why I was so excited to get my hands on the Fusion. Because paddle manufacturers usually make shorter paddles wider, it gives them their own unique swing pattern, which makes them pretty incomparable to elongated paddles. That's just not the case here. We're going to get into some playability. I'm super excited to talk about these paddles because they are so special, and I just want to warn you, the on-court footage here is going to be pretty funny. We were playing in very icy and sort of snowy conditions because I needed some on-court footage with these, but don't worry, I brought them with me to Hawaii where I played for at least 2 weeks. I just wasn't filming my sessions there. Hopefully you like it. It was kind of hilarious to play there. Weirdly very difficult to not slip on ice, who would have thought, but hockey pickleball could be very fun. So I usually like to start reviews with the most outstanding characteristic, and don't worry, we'll get to power in a second. I just have to explain the feel before I talk about what makes the power so special. The feel on these Pro Powers is unique. I've really never felt anything like this. In fact, I've played with a lot of Gearbox paddles in the past, and they feel very different, where those are kind of boardy, and these feel almost more like a trampoline. The ball absolutely sinks into the paddle face, and that makes the dwell time really long. But unlike other high dwell time paddles, instead of feeling like the ball loses energy during pocketing, it actually feels like it springs out with even more energy than it came in with. The best way I can describe this is by comparing what happens with a pillow versus with a trampoline. When something falls into a pillow, all of the energy is cushioned out of it. But when something falls into a trampoline, it retains that energy and then springs it out with even more. That's what these feel like. Now, the other thing to talk about with feel here is that these paddles have extremely well-defined sweet spots. I've never personally had a problem with honeycomb cord carbon paddles, but compared to these, they are significantly more muted. These feel super raw, and you feel every bit of the ball on impact, and I love the connection to the ball that gives me, but it also means there is a noticeable drop-off in performance when you're hitting outside the sweet spot. Honeycomb cord paddles, especially the ones with foam edge guards, are doing a very good job of expanding the optimal hitting zone outside of one really small but well-defined sweet spot, and these aren't quite there yet. To be honest though, once I got used to that, I didn't really mind, and I'll talk more about why in the control section later. I also just want to say, if you ever feel like your sweet spot is too small, putting lead around the edges will expand it, but keep in mind that's going to sacrifice hand speed and maneuverability. But anyways, these paddles have a really unique feel that definitely caught me off guard because I was expecting power, but not with this trampoline-y sensation. I really thought these were going to be another one of those instantaneously launchy, kind of boardy paddles, but that's definitely not the case. Obviously, we usually associate a longer dwell time with soft paddles, which are less powerful, but as you can imagine, because of that trampoline effect, these are insanely powerful. It really feels like when the ball is sinking into the paddle, it's loading up on power and then slings out with way more energy than you would ever expect on a pickleball paddle, almost like stringing at a low tension in tennis. Now, the first few shots I hit with these were ground strokes, so I really felt the full force of that trampoline effect, and I started thinking to myself, okay, this probably won't be as apparent at the net because the impact isn't as major, but that wasn't really the case. That superb energy return is just as apparent up there, so as you can imagine, pop is world class. You can put away volleys with very minimal effort. They almost feel like a cheat code in that regard. Now, of course, the elongated is significantly more powerful from the baseline and to a certain extent at the net because you have more leverage and that's never going to change, but I really like the Fusion for power, especially at the net. Because it's shorter and narrower, it's super maneuverable, which means it's very fast to bring through contact. You can easily flick the Fusion, which means you don't have to work as hard for paddle head speed, which helps with power when you're trying to react quickly. Don't get me wrong, top end power definitely isn't the same on these two. Pop probably isn't equal either, but much closer because of that. Now again, it took me a second to get used to this power because I'd become so used to the power profile of a thermoform paddle. The whole thermoforming thing is basically about making paddles as stiff as possible so that dwell time is super short and the ball retains a maximum of energy during pocketing. These are going in a totally different direction, but the end result is similar, if not even higher levels of power than on the stiffest thermoform paddles. Now here's the thing, like I said, dwell time is super short on thermoform paddles, which is great for their power, but it does sacrifice a lot of their control. Dwell time is long on these, which significantly benefits their control. Okay, I'm not going to tell you that these are going to be the best paddles for control, but what I am going to tell you is that they have a much better control profile than other paddles that have a similar amount of power. Of course, that comes down to the extended dwell time. Once you're used to the fact that instead of cushioning the ball, that dwell time is going to add some power, you can start to take full advantage of what that extra dwell time gives you. Dwell time means that you feel the ball sink into the paddle face. No matter what it does after that, it still means that you have that split second extra to control it while it's in there. That's a sensation you usually only get on soft paddles, and definitely not on paddles that are also this powerful. So in terms of the power to control ratio here, these things are pretty much off the charts. Now still, part of what makes those super soft cushion paddles so good for control is that they kind of self-correct if you overpower a touch shot. You won't get that here, but good players won't mind that too much. I'm not calling myself a good player, but I actually think I prefer this type of control over what super soft paddles give me. The trade-off you make with a paddle that's super cushioned is that insane softness kind of turns into mushiness, which means you don't have the best feel for the ball. It's the exact opposite here. You've heard me say this before, but good feel means that you can get totally dialed into a paddle once you've gotten to know its quirks. The quirk on these ones being that it's not going to help you if you don't have soft hands. Now, the one little knock I am going to give them on their control is that they do have a pretty small sweet spot and they are quite punishing outside the sweet spot. This just means you are going to have to be on top of your game. You can't just turn off your brain in the control game the way you can on a Lux Control Air or a Vanguard 2.0, for example. I also actually prefer the Fusion in the control game despite it having a slightly smaller sweet spot, and that's because this paddle has insanely high deception potential. When you combine high dwell time with that really good flickability, you have one of the best paddles for cat and mouse play around the net. Plus, because this paddle has such high pop, it adds another element of surprise to your play, which means your opponent has to be really careful when you get into dinkfests up there. Okay, this review has been mainly awesome stuff so far, and it's going to stay that way, but I will say spin is my least favorite thing about these paddles. Now, I watched some reviews that say spin is elite on these, and I totally agree. In fact, I think this is one of the areas where Gearbox improved most with the Pro Powers, but there's still a little something missing for me. I've been referring to this type of spin a lot in recent videos, but something I've been consciously trying to add to my game is that slower, more grabby type of spin. It's almost like combining a touch shot with a spin shot because you slow down your stroke so much, but the grit wasn't doing such a good job of digging into the ball on these. It could be because they're thinner, but compared to the Loco I was testing last week, for example, I wasn't able to get the same arc on the ball, at least at slower speeds, and you can see the result here with some of the clips. Now that spin is only used in a pretty unique situation, and I'm very excited to try the Pro controls to see if they're better for that type of spin shot, but for any other type of spin shot, these are absolutely elite. I actually used to play with a super thin Gearbox paddle back in 2020 because nothing else responded to a full Tennessee spin technique as well as those, and it's still the case here, just even better now. Hitting full pace spin shots with these is an absolute dream. They produce tons of RPMs, and that complements the super powerful launch absolutely perfectly. You'll easily dominate exchanges from the baseline, and when it's time to hit a passing shot, they'll absolutely whiz past your opponent. So go for that more powerful style of passing shot over the more touch-oriented one. Now again, like it was with power, spin is higher on the elongated because of leverage and physics, but spin variety is a little better on the Fusion. I say only a little because the elongated is so thin and aerodynamic that it's one of those paddles you can whip through contact super quickly, but the shape of the Fusion does make it noticeably quicker. Plus, and this is my favorite thing about the Fusion, but because it's basically just a mini elongated in terms of dimensions, you have a similar swing pattern and pivot point on this paddle. That means that the swing pattern feels more like a tennis racket compared to other paddles that are this short, which complements the technique tennis players have developed over many years. So if I haven't made it clear during this review, I'm going to make it clear now. This is a paddle everybody should be looking at, and when I say everybody, I mean at least every competitive player. I know they're expensive, but I need to emphasize that this insanely high power to control ratio is not something you're gonna find on a lot of paddles, and that's pretty darn special. The elongated especially is one of the best paddles for singles right now. I say singles because that's where fast-paced ground strokes are a little more common, and that's this paddle's bread and butter. The Fusion is going to be great if you want a more fun paddle that has slightly better variety, and I think it could become truly elite in terms of stability and consistency if I played around with a bit of lead tape. That's the only little drawback to the Fusion and to shorter paddles in general. Shorter paddles don't exude the same confidence because they don't have the same consistency and stability as elongated paddles. The elongated would also probably be amazing with some lead tape, especially adding it to the throat would make it softer, which I can't even imagine how good it would be for power and control at that point. Now I will say, everyone should try these, but they may not be for everyone. The feel is pretty unique and it takes quite a bit of time to get used to it, but if you're willing to put in that time, the upside is pretty insane. I'd really only avoid these if you're looking for that cushiony style of control, which I know a lot of people are, so if that's you, I'd go for something else. Like I said, I haven't tried the Pro controls, but if it's just this with a little bit less of that trampoline effect, it could be really good in that sense. I'll try to get those reviewed as soon as possible. For now though, that is going to be the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that if you do want to demo the Pro Powers, you can come visit us in store, or you can check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.